when you talk about that e-commerce explosion, it's not just those traditional e-commerce markets like Indonesia. Now, the likes of Vietnam are also coming into the fray and changing pretty much the landscape, accelerating that explosion.
Yes, definitely. So what we have seen during the pandemic, not only the traditional economies like which we expect Indonesia, we have seen strong growth rate emerging out of Thailand also, Vietnam also, and Malaysia also. So some of these economies generating around 80 to 100% e-commerce growth. So, but if you look at the potential, as you rightly said, the penetration is still around 3.5% as a percentage of retail. And if you look at China, it's around 25 to 30%. So still a lot of growth left in this part of the world on e-commerce per se.
The question really is whether we can get to $300 billion in transactions even earlier than 2025. It does seem like there is momentum.
Definitely, there's a momentum strong towards that. So what pandemic has done has brought about permanent shift in consumer habit and behavior. And we think it's sustainable. And as these consumer habit remains permanent, it's quite possible that some of these numbers that we are forecasting can be accelerated further.
It does seem like when you take a look at the e-commerce players, competition is within the domestic space. Is there a sense perhaps that it could be more international? I mean, what is it about the ecosystem that needs to change for that to happen?
So if you look at, there are two key things in the ecosystem. One is obviously logistic, warehousing, last mile delivery. Another one is the payment. And third is the consumer getting more used towards online commerce per se. So I think these three have seen some acceleration during the pandemic, and obviously you have seen consumer habit changing. And the investments into 3PL logistics has been happening over the last 3 to 5 years. And we think there is further acceleration happening towards that. And also the e-commerce players themselves are investing in last mile delivery and logistics. The third aspect is the payments. So we have already seen adoption of wallets and also emergence of real-time payment system across the ASEAN countries. With the exception of Indonesia, all countries have real-time payment networks. So all these things will definitely facilitate e-commerce adoption and hence faster growth that we were talking about earlier.
And that takes us to the startup space, and Indonesia seems to be pretty an exciting market right now. I mean, we're seeing larger rounds, larger investments. Where do we go from here? Where do you see the biggest potential?
So as I mentioned, there's still the traditional internet economies like e-commerce still pretty low. So I think there is still more investments needed on that front and relative industries. So we have potentially a lot more verticals coming up in e-commerce. Per se, grocery, we're seeing a lot of growth happening on that front. Then you got health tech and education tech. Already we have seen a lot of investments happening during the last 2 years. And this pandemic has already accelerated during in those verticals. So I think those are the new verticals which are emerging, but definitely there is still a lot of scope left in the traditional internet economy, and we continue to maintain that there will be more investments in that.
The question is the pace of that growth going forward.
Yeah, I think if you look at Indonesia per se, e-commerce penetration is around 6.5% of GDP, retail. So I think the pace will continue to accelerate. And even if you assume China at around 7-8% of retail was around 12-13, and they doubled in almost three years. Even if you assume there is a little bit slowdown, it's quite possible Indonesian retail e-commerce penetration can accelerate double in 5 years. So there's still a lot of growth in these.
One interesting note about the startup scene in Southeast Asia is that there's been very few exits. Why is that?
Yeah, clearly the business models has to be initially formed up for some of these exits that you're talking about. But we have seen a lot of new routes be coming across. Obviously, all of us have been seeing news flows of 2 internet companies in Southeast Asia looking at SPAC routes and all that stuff. So as some of these crystallize, I think there will be more investments coming in, and hence opportunities will open up. So as companies focus more on profitability, and I think those are the few 3 aspects which can help in terms of more exit routes for these companies.
Before we let you go, we'll let you look into the crystal ball. I mean, we've seen the likes of Chinese players becoming global players. We've yet to see that happen with, Southeast Asian players. How soon do you think it will take the likes of Tokopedia, for instance, to be a global player?
See, I think the domestic economy is still pretty big. I think there's huge opportunity there. But one company, as you can already see, C Limited is already looking at their game is global. And obviously, they're increasing their footprints in Latin America. So it's quite possible C may be one of those companies that you're talking about, but others to go global, I think there is still a lot of things need to be done in their domestic market before they can venture out here.
So for now, C just by itself, hopefully more soon. Varun Ahuja, we thank you for your insights.